Hey, I want to say real quick, thank you guys for dealing with change. I know some people don't like change. How many of you you're that person? Like you walked in, you're like, what? I'm out. Like, I don't know where to sit. Things are kind of weird. You get a little freaked out by change. We understand that. But we strive very hard as a team, as a worship team, as the leaders of your church, to be driven by the Holy Spirit and to be led by Him. And sometimes that means just stopping and slowing down and kind of stripping down and asking the Lord, what can we do to make sure our hearts are geared towards worshiping you in a way that you deserve and in the way that you lead us to. And as we study through the Scriptures, we read things like in Ephesians 5, it says that we're to encourage one another and sing songs and spiritual songs and hymns together as a church family, that our voices can actually be sung as an encouragement to one another. And I know what you're thinking. You're like, my voice is anything but encouraging to anybody. But that's not true. That God has put us together as a church family in a unique way, in a unique place. I think that we can be an encouragement to one another. And one of the things, too, we wanted to feel close together as a church family, even just in symbolic ways. And so we thought, hey, why not push the chairs up a little bit closer? I realized this row right here is going to be completely empty for a while. But I'm going to be incredibly grateful for the front row crew that sits right here. Maybe it'll come, maybe 20 years, maybe 30, I don't know. However, the Lord will have me here. I hope one day to see that full, and more importantly, that people would come to know Christ through our church family. And so that's why we just try to be led by Him, try to do what He calls us to do. So if you love the new setup, if you love kind of the strip down for 1 week, and you're grateful for that, just thank the Lord and thank Matt and Gabe. It's kind of their vision. If you hate it, then talk to the Lord because He told us to do it. And you could talk to me too. Okay, you could blame me if you hate it. But we're just incredibly grateful to come together as a church family and to worship Him. And I don't know about you this morning, I was really encouraged to just hear your voices, to hear you sing praises to Jesus in this place. It's incredibly encouraging to me. And I'm deeply grateful to worship with you. As a church family. If you got your Bible, go ahead and open up to Genesis chapter 46. I don't know if you realize this, but we've been studying Genesis for nearly a year. We started in January, the second week of January, and we've been walking through chapter by chapter, verse by verse, and Lord willing, we'll finish in 2 weeks. And so I know at the beginning we were praying, Lord, we're not sure that we'll finish this before you come back. But it looks that way. We could pray otherwise, but it looks like, Lord willing, we'll finish up in 2 weeks. After the next 2 weeks, we'll do what we always do. For those of you that maybe you're new to our church family, we always do a Q&A Sunday that just looks back. Obviously, we cannot exhaust God's Word. We could study Genesis for our entire life and not get all that Genesis has to offer to us. And here's why. Because an infinite, awesome, amazing, glorious God wrote it. And we'll never exhaust Him. You can never know God too much. He's that amazing. And so we realize that, hey, after we go through this, we could spend many years on this that will not exhaust all the questions and all the things that it has to say. And so we try to leave room for that, hey, if there's this pressing question that as we were studying through this book, maybe something stood out to you or maybe you wondered about something, that you could be free to ask those questions. Maybe it's a practical question, maybe it's a theological question, whatever that is, we want to leave room for that. And so we'll do our Q&A in 3 weeks, Lord willing, after we finish this. And so jumping into Genesis chapter 46, we kind of have to be honest that as we come towards the end of this book, it seems like things have not gone well since, let's say, Genesis 2. I don't know if you feel that way, maybe looking back at your life, like things have not gone well since, I don't know, when I was born. It just seems like things are constantly messed up. And to be fair, it has often been God's people that have caused many of the problems, hasn't it? That it seems like every time God comes in, He speaks, and He has a plan, that God's people tend to, I don't know how else to put it, but blow it. mess it up. We've seen the kind of devastation and brokenness that sin comes, not only from our sin, but from being sinned against by other people, and just the consequences of living in a sick, sin-filled world. And so God's people, over the last 44 chapters, have seemed very bleak, very hopeless, very unfortunate, troubled at times, discouraged, dysfunctional. Now in Genesis chapter 46, we're going to see a sharp shift, a dramatic shift in the family of faith, God's people. And God is going to, in Genesis chapter 46, bring a time of peace for his people, where things are going to settle down. They're going to have some prosperity. They're going to have some power. They're going to have some control in the land. But here is the danger. Here's the danger. I think if we learn nothing else from Genesis, we can definitely learn this. That when things finally do turn good, when peace does come, when things start to get a little bit more stable for God's people have a tendency of blowing it again. In other words, from Genesis, we've learned that we fail so often. But despite our failure, God is a sovereign, good, and gracious God that is powerful and is in complete control no matter how many times we blow it. Can you be thankful for that? Can I be thankful for that this morning? That no matter how bad we screw things up for ourselves or for other people, that we have a God who is good and who is more powerful and more in control than we can ever be. So let's look at what happens. The family of faith is going to do 4 things in Genesis 46 and 47 that are going to change the course of how God's people have tended to blown it, and they're going to actually do it right this time. So in the past where people have failed, God's people, Jacob and his family, are going to do some things that are right, some things that we can look to and we can implement in our own lives as well. The first thing is this. In Genesis 46, the first thing that we're going to see is the possession of their faith. I got points this morning. I don't normally do that, but I brought them this morning, okay? So Merry Christmas, I guess. I don't know. First is the possession of their faith. Look at verse 1 of chapter 46. So Israel took his journey with all that he had and came to a place called Beersheba and offered sacrifices to the God of his father Isaac. Now let me stop here and just recap a little bit, because we left off in Genesis chapter 45 where Jacob's son Joseph was in Egypt. He was ruling, he was reigning, and there was a famine that had spread all across the land. Joseph's family was up in Canaan, about 220 miles away, and they were starving. But God used the unfortunate thing that happened to Joseph to be a fortunate thing, a blessing, a benefit for his people, for his family. He used the suffering of Joseph to ultimately cause a blessing not only to his family, but to all the nations. And so Joseph revealed to his brothers who betrayed him that he was in Egypt and that he was in control, and he sent his brothers back to Canaan to retrieve their father. Now his father thought that Joseph was dead. He thought he was dead, but the brothers revealed to him that he was alive, and in fact, not only was he alive, he was doing well, and he was going to be a person of rescue. And so Jacob is going to make the journey back to Egypt to reunite with his son, whom he thought he was dead. Now, again, good things, right? Everyone else is starving. God is preserving and saving his people. Jacob thought his son Joseph was dead. His son is alive, and God is reuniting them. His brothers betrayed him. Joseph reconciled with them. All good things are going on for God's people. Now, I don't know about you. Don't you like when things go right and things go good, where it seems like you have some peace? Well, that's what's going on. There's peace. And so in Genesis chapter 46, Jacob is up and leaving. He's leaving Israel to go down to Egypt. Now, he is at this point 130 years old. Now, I hope in my life to make it to 130. I realize a lot of people are like, I'd never want to live that long. How many of you are like, I'd never want to live to 130? Like, I'm ready to go now, okay? Wow, there's a lot of young people raising your hand. That's okay. All right. Praise God. Hopefully you know Jesus. But I kind of hope, I think it would be cool to make it to 130. I don't think that's going to happen because of a couple reasons. The life expectancy in the United States is only 79 for a man. It's less than that if that man is a pastor, and it's even less than that if he's a Bears fan. And so it just goes downhill from there. And so I don't think I'll make it to 130. If I do, though, by the chance and the grace of God that I do make it to 130, I can tell you there's one thing that I'm not doing, and that's moving. I hate moving. Anybody else hate moving? Okay, I've only had to move twice in my life. Once by myself when I moved to college. I moved to Kentucky. And then one more time when I moved with my wife, no kids, back up here. And I hated it. And I didn't have a ton of stuff back then, or now, to move. But just moving stinks. And I wonder, how many of you have like a crazy horror moving story? Like you were moving. How many of you broke down while moving? Anybody? Oh, you're still mad, so you're like, don't bring that up, please. Have any of you moved really far across state kind of thing? Yeah, I can't imagine. But none of us have had to move like Jacob, Israel. None of us have had to move at 130, and not only at 130, this guy is over 100 years old, 130 years old. He has nearly 100 family members, probably more than that. All right, how many of you got 100 family members that you had to move? None of us, right? He's got a bunch of stuff, a bunch of animals. He's got goats. Any of you had to move goats when you moved? Cows? Chickens? No? Nobody? All right, and listen, no U-Haul. This is literally like pack everything up in the Honda hatchback and let's go. Like everybody, get the whole family in there, get all the stuff, get the goats, everybody's going. Can we just be honest at how incredibly difficult this would be for Jacob, for Israel? This would take faith, and this is why we see what happens. Israel makes a pit stop on the way to Egypt in a place called Beersheba. Now, Beersheba is an extremely important place, not only in the book of Genesis, but for Israel himself, because it was in Beersheba that two other people worshipped. It was in Beersheba that Israel's daddy Isaac worshipped, and it was in Beersheba where Israel's granddaddy Abraham worshipped God. And so it was a special place for Israel to stop and to worship. And we kind of have to ask ourselves, well, why is he doing this? Why is he stopping to worship along the way, on a long journey? It's like when you get 20 minutes into a road trip and your kid or your family member says, I have to go to the bathroom. Why would he do that? Why would he stop? I mean, it seems like a good thing, right? He's going down to Egypt to reunite with his son, who he hasn't seen in over 20 years. His entire family is down there, or headed down there. There's food down there. It's all good things. Well, here's what's going on. This is really important. Jacob, Israel, knew that going down to Egypt was what he wanted to do. He knew it was what his kids wanted him to do. He knew it was a good thing going down there because there was food down there. But church family, a man of faith, a man who believes and trusts in God, will always ask the question, what does God want me to do? Maybe this looks like the best decision. Maybe I want to do it. Maybe everybody else wants me to do it. But ultimately, what does God want me to do? See, just because something looks right, just because all the signs may seem to point to this thing, just because maybe you like it or it sounds smart or because other people urge you to do it, does not necessarily mean that God wants it. So it's so important for us in our life to ask the question, is he really behind this? Would this be pleasing to him? Or am I really only focused on me? So Israel, he stops and he worships and he asks this question, this time of intimacy with God. God, is this what you want me to do? Is this where you want me to go? Is this the right thing? Am I making the right decision on this? See, something's bugging him. Something's getting in the way of his faith, and he needed to hear from the Lord, and that's what the Lord does in verse 2. And God spoke to Israel. All right, who shows up? Who shows up? God shows up in visions of the night and said, Jacob, Jacob. And he said, here I am. Then he said, I am the God of your father. Do not be afraid to go down to Egypt. All right, what does that tell us? If God tells him, do not be afraid to go down there, what does that tell us about Jacob? Don't think too hard about this. Thank you. Garrett from the hallway got it, all right? He's afraid. He's scared. He's fearful. And God says, do not be afraid. For there I will make you into a great nation. I myself will go down with you into Egypt, and I will also bring you up again, and Joseph's hand shall close your eyes. See, Israel, he stops to worship in Beersheba, and he says, God, listen, what do you want me to do? I'm scared. I don't know if this is the right thing. And God shows up, and God says, and the first thing he says is this. God says, Jacob, I am God. You know what that is? God didn't block his number when he called Jacob. God wanted Jacob to first be reminded of who God is. He wanted Jacob to know exactly who was speaking. And so he says, listen, Jacob, there is one God. There is one God, and you are not him. I am God. I am in control. I am the all-wise, all-knowing, gracious, powerful, eternal, holy, and faithful God. See, church family, I have to be honest with you that sometimes you and I, we need to be reminded that there is one God and we are not him. That we don't have the kind of character that God has. We don't have the kind of control that God has. We don't have the kind of power and authority that God has. And so there's some things in our life that we need to let go of trying to be God, and we need to let God be God. There's one God, and we are not him. Neither is Jacob. But that's not where God leaves him. God carries on. He reassures Jacob in his fear of his purpose. He says, listen, I will make you a great nation. In other words, I'm taking you down to Egypt, and this isn't a pointless trip. All right, we're going down here for a reason. I'm going to take your family of a few, and I'm going to turn you into millions, all right? And we read in the book of Exodus, which is kind of the sequel to Genesis, that is precisely what God does. God takes this small family, and he turns them into a nation. So God has a purpose for this trip. And then God reassures Jacob of his presence. He says, listen, I will go, I myself, I will go with you. In fact, Jacob, you can't fulfill the purpose that I have for you unless I go with you. And then God reassures him of his timing. He says, listen, Jacob, I will send you down to Egypt, but then he says, I will also bring you up again. You know what God is telling Jacob there? Egypt is a hotel. It's not your home. Jacob, I'm sending you down to Egypt, but I'm not going to keep you down there forever. Don't get comfortable. It's a pit stop, and there's a point. And the point is this, and I think this is a really important point because we can miss it even for our own lives. That no matter what you're going through, no matter where you are in your life, whether you're happy with your life right now or you're unhappy in your life, right now that if your faith is in God, if you have a relationship with Jesus Christ, then ultimately where you are right now is a pit stop into the place of where God is ultimately taking you. And that's encouraging. Because I think so often we look and we're so focused on the here and now that we forget the there and then and what God is bringing for us. And so we get wrapped up in ourselves and we get wrapped up in our situations of what's going on right now, and we forget that ultimately God has a purpose and a plan. So he says, don't get comfortable. I'm going to bring you back up out of Egypt. And we see that again, not in Genesis, but later in the book of Exodus. But he says, don't get discouraged. Then God reassures Jacob of his promise. He says, listen, Joseph's hand shall close your eyes. In other words, Jacob, don't be afraid, man. You're going to see your boy again. I know you're maybe afraid that you're going to die on the way there, but listen, Joseph will ultimately close your eyes. He will see you and you will see him before you die. The point of all of this is as Jacob is looking and worshiping God in his life, looking for confidence, looking for reassurance from God, because he is fearful, we see that you can possess a faith in God, you can trust and believe in God, and yet still have some fears in your life. You still have some questions, you still have some doubts, you still have some things going on. But listen to me, if we learn anything from this, we have to see that where there is fear, there is a word from God to strengthen our faith. That Israel possessed faith in God. He believed in him. He trusted him. That's why he stopped to worship in Beersheba. But his fear was getting in the way of what he ultimately needed from God, and that's God's word, and that's exactly what God gave him. So let me ask you, Christian, what fear do you have in your life right now? What are some places in your life that you feel maybe uncertain or you lack confidence? What's causing you to be afraid? And more importantly, what fear do you have in your life right now that cannot be remedied, cannot be dissolved by the promises of God and his word? Are you bringing your fears to the Lord, or are you allowing those fears to draw you away from him? See, we see Israel doing the right thing, and he comes to God with his fears. And God brings reassurance. Then the next thing that we see is the passing of his faith. Not only the possession of faith, not only does Israel believe in God and trust him despite his fears, but we see that Israel will ultimately pass on this faith to his family. Look at verse 5. Then Jacob set out from Beersheba with confidence in God, and the sons of Israel carried Jacob their father, their little ones, and their wives in the wagons that Pharaoh had sent to carry him. They also took their livestock and their goods, which they had gained in the land of Canaan, and came into Egypt. Jacob and all his offspring with him, his sons and his sons' sons with him, his daughters and his sons' daughters. All the offspring he brought with him into Egypt. All right, now we're coming into a genealogy, and I realize that as we hit these genealogies, sometimes there's really cool stuff in there. This genealogy kind of has one major point, and I realize it's a lot of names and it's a lot of people that maybe we don't know these people personally, but they're really important. So stick with me, all right? So here we go. Genealogy, verse 8 of 46. Now these are the names of the descendants of Israel, who came into Egypt: Jacob and his sons, Reuben, Jacob's firstborn. And the sons of Reuben, Hanok, Palu, Hezron, and Carmi. The sons of Simeon, Jamul, Jamin, Ohad, Jachin, Zohar, and Shaul, the son of a Canaanite woman. The sons of Levi, Gershon, Kohath, and Merari. The sons of Judah, Onan, Shelah, Perez, and Zerah. But remember, and Onan died in the land of Canaan. You remember Genesis 38? Right? You had nightmares about it, right? Me too. Don't remind me. And the sons of Perez were Hezron and Hamul. The sons of Issachar, Tola, Puva, and Job. Job, also pronounced Job, which quite possibly could be the same Job that suffered and has a book of the Bible written about him. Shimron. Verse 14, the sons of Zebulon. I feel like Zebulon is the bad guy in Power Rangers. But I don't know. Sarid, Elon, and Jaleel. These are the sons of Leah, whom she bore to Jacob in Padam Aram, together with his daughter Dinah, although his sons and his daughters numbered 33. Altogether, his sons and his daughters numbered 33. The sons of Gad, Ziphion, Haggai, Shuni, Ezbon, Eri, Arodi, and Areli. The sons of Asher, Imnah, Ishva, Ishbi, Beriah, Sari, their sister. And the sons of Beriah, Heber, and Malachil. These are the sons of Zilpah, whom Laban gave to Leah his daughter, and these she bore to Jacob, 16 persons. The sons of Rachel. Remember, Rachel was Jacob's, that's his baby girl. That's the one that he loves and he's enamored with. Jacob's wife. Joseph and Benjamin. And to Joseph in the land of Egypt were born Manasseh and Ephraim, whom Aseneth, the daughter of Potiphera, the priest of On, bore to him. And the sons of Benjamin, listen to this, the sons of Benjamin, Bela, Becher, Ashbeth, Gera, Naaman, Ehi, Rosh, Muppim, Huppim, okay, I imagine they're twins, and Ard. Listen to me, how many kids does Benjamin have? 10. Do you know how old Benjamin is? 21. Crazy. But I guess that's good. 22. These are the sons of Rachel, who were born to Jacob, 14 persons in all. The sons of Dan, Hushim. The sons of Naphtali, Jeziel, Guni, Jezer, and Shelam. These are the sons of Bilhah, whom Laban gave to Rachel his daughter, and these she bore to Jacob, 7 persons in all. All right, so here's the whole family tree, knots in all, 1 dad, 4 wives, 12 sons, 1 daughter, bunch of grandkids, bunch of great-grandkids. What's the point? Look at verse 26. All the persons belonging to Jacob. All right, how many? All of them. Everyone. Belonging to Jacob, who came into Egypt, who were his own descendants, not including Jacob's sons' wives, were 66 persons in all. And the sons of Joseph were born to him in Egypt were 2. And all the persons of the house of Jacob who came into Egypt were 70. All right? Now, don't get distracted by the numbers. Like a lot of times people want to focus on the numbers, and that's important. How does this add up? Who is he exactly talking about? Who are the 70? Here's the point. The point is simply this. Jacob took everything and everyone with him down to Egypt. The entire family came with him. He didn't leave anyone or anything behind. Why is that important? Because God is not intending to just bless one man, Jacob or Israel. God is intending that through this one man, that whole nations, all the nations of all the earth will be blessed. What that means then, it's not enough for just Jacob to believe, but he wants the whole family to come into a saving knowledge of God. It's not enough for Jacob to just be a part of the covenantal family of God with the promise of God. Jacob wants his entire family to come to know God and to be in a relationship with him. You see, Israel here is thinking generationally about saving faith. Do you know what that means? Jacob, in the decisions he makes, the words he speaks, the way he acts, is all for the purpose of showing his children and his grandchildren and his great-grandchildren that God is a God who is worth worshiping. Now, Christians, can we stop for a second and ask ourselves, do we think about that? Do we ask ourselves, in how I am living now and what am I believing in right now, will that set my family up in a way that my grandchildren and my great-grandchildren will know of Jesus because of their great-granddaddy, great-grandmother? Or am I only thinking about my faith and how strong I am and how much I know the Lord? Jacob is not just concerned about possessing faith, but passing faith as well. You know, I was thinking about this. Sometimes I say to Claire, and I say it to Elliot, but I'm a little bit more optimistic with Claire. I say, you know what? I pray that you do greater things than Daddy ever did for Jesus. I tell them that all the time. I tell them that whether they're a mechanic or a missionary, wherever God leads them, if they stay here, if they move away, if they get married or stay single forever, Claire, I pray that God would use them and God would do great things for them. And God could do that despite my leadership in the family, but God has geared us in a way that we have the potential to have a great influence on future generations. And I don't know about you, but I don't think about that enough. That what can I do as a person? What can we do as a church to put people in the best position that people would know about Jesus because we were here? See, it's not enough to just possess the faith. We have to be willing to pass it on. And Jacob wanted to pass the faith on to his family, and in particular, 2 of his sons took to it, because we read about them in verse 28. Now, he had sent Judah ahead of him. Now, they're on their way to Egypt. And Jacob, Israel, says, Judah, you go on ahead. He sent him ahead to Joseph to show the way before him to Goshen. And they came into the land of Goshen. Now, Goshen sits just outside of Egypt. It's a part of Egypt. It's under the protection of Egypt. But it's a real fertile, nice piece of real estate just outside of metropolitan Egypt. And it's going to be important. So they're coming into Goshen. Then Joseph prepared his chariot. All right, this is going to be a beautiful picture here. And went up to meet Israel, his father, in Goshen. He presented himself to him and fell on his neck and wept on his neck a good while. And Israel said to Joseph, now let me die, since I have seen your face and know that you are still alive. Now, I realize it's easy to read that story and not feel the emotional weight of it. You have a father who thinks his son is dead, finds out he's alive, and hears the reunion. 20 years in the making. You have Jacob, who's being carried in because he's old and he's sickly, and you have Joseph, who's young, he's powerful, and he's got his own chariot, and he's riding up, and he stops, and he gets off the chariot, and you just get this image of a father and a son reuniting. Now, I was thinking about this. It's one thing to see your child be born. It's an amazing thing. Nothing can replace it. But I think there's another important time in a life as a parent where you see your child born again. Where you see your child come to a new life. And for Jacob, it's like Joseph was born again. He was dead, but now he's alive, and now Jacob says, I can die peacefully. Knowing that his son was alive, and not only alive, but believed God and trusted God. So Jacob possessed the faith. He passed the faith to his children. And then we see the protection of the faith in verse 31. The whole family's down in Egypt. Joseph has been there 20 plus years. He knows the land really well. And he's going to set his brothers up again in verse 31. So Joseph said to his brothers and to his father's household, I will go up and tell Pharaoh, and I will say to him, my brothers and my father's household, who are in the land of Canaan, have come to me. And the men are shepherds, for they have been keepers of livestock, and have brought their flocks and the herds and all that they have. When Pharaoh calls to you, all right, he's telling them what to say and what to do, because he knows Pharaoh and he knows what's going to happen. He says, when Pharaoh calls to you and says, what's your occupation? What's your job? You shall say, your servants have been keepers of livestock from our youth even until now, both we and our fathers, in order that you may dwell in the land of Goshen, for every shepherd is an abomination to the Egyptians. All right, here's what's going on. Joseph's family is in Egypt. he knows that Pharaoh is going to want to meet the family, but the family, they're kind of a rough group of people. He knows Egyptian culture. He knows what Egyptian people think, and he's going to use the differences there for his benefit, for the benefit of his family. Okay? Because what do the boys do? What's their job? They're shepherds. They're shepherds. Now, do we have any shepherds here? Anyone keep sheep? Okay. You see, we kind of have the same problem the Egyptians have, a little bit. We're a little bit disconnected from what that's like. And I realized this yesterday. I was at the Shed Aquarium, and they were playing a video, for some reason, of all different kinds of animals. And they showed a sheep, and it was like, bah. And all the people in the room were like, aw. And I was like, what's wrong with you? If you see a sheep up close, they're not cute. They smell horrible, and they're mean. They bite you. See, you don't know. Maybe I should have brought one today. I wonder if they got that on Amazon. It's not a glorious job. And when you hang out with sheep and you talk to sheep, and sheep are your best friend, and you start to smell like them, you start to act like them, shepherding is a rough, rough job. And the people took that, the Egyptians, wrongfully, because they said, hey, you're different than us, we don't really like you, and so you're an abomination to us. In other words, the Egyptians want nothing to do with shepherds, and Joseph is going to use that to his advantage. And the reason he's going to use it to his advantage is so that his family can live in Goshen, and I'll tell you why that's important in a second. But let's keep reading, because it's going to happen. All right, so he's bringing in his brothers to Pharaoh. The best illustration I could think of, the best analogy I could think of, is it's like he's taking the guys from Duck Dynasty and Larry the Cable Guy, and he's meeting with President Obama. It's just there's some customs, there's some differences, right, that are going to have to be coached through, and that's what Joseph's doing. So Joseph went in and told Pharaoh, my father and my brothers are with their livestock and their herds, and all that they possess have come from the land of Canaan. They are now in the land of Goshen. And from among his brothers he took 5 men and presented them to Pharaoh. Now, so what he does is he goes into the meeting. He tells all the brothers, you're going to meet with Pharaoh. We want them to think that we're kind of, we're shepherds. We're going to take on full-blown shepherding, all right? We want to give him 100% of what shepherds are like, all right? In other words, be crazy. Act wild. Because we want to live in Goshen. We don't want to live in Egypt. So he takes 5 brothers, and it doesn't tell us who he takes. I have some guesses. I'm guessing Reuben. I'm guessing Simeon. Maybe even Benjamin. But he's going to take the wildest, craziest, smelliest, kind of backwoods kind of guys, because he wants Pharaoh to be disgusted by them. He wants Pharaoh to not want these guys to live in Egypt. And so Pharaoh said to the brothers, what is your occupation? And they said to Pharaoh, your servants are shepherds, as our fathers were. They said to Pharaoh, we have come to sojourn in the land, for there is no pasture for your shepherds, for your servants. Flocks, or the famine is severe, for the famine is severe in the land of Canaan. And now please, let your servants dwell in the land of Goshen. All right, where do they want to live? Goshen. Pharaoh said to Joseph, your father and your brothers have come to you. The land of Egypt is before you. Settle your father. Oh, I love this. The land of Egypt is before you. Live wherever you want to live. All right? You can live anywhere. And then he says this, let them settle in the land of Goshen. So where does Pharaoh want them to live? Goshen. In other words, Pharaoh says, hey, you can have the whole place to yourself, but they got to sleep outside. They got to stay over there. Well, that's precisely what Joseph wanted. And he says, and if you, I love this, and if you know any able men among them, put them in charge of my livestock. They could take my, get all the sheep out of here, all right? We just want them all gone, all away, put them in Goshen. All right? So here, why would Joseph want that? Why would Joseph want his brothers to live in Goshen away from Egypt? You know, Joseph's a powerful guy. He probably could have got his brothers a job in Egypt. They could have been nobles. They could have been leaders. They could have been all kinds of things. Why would he want them in Goshen? Well, here's why. We've learned from Genesis that the worst thing that could possibly happen for the family of faith is for them to be acquainted with the culture of pagan people, to intermarry with people who are not believers, to surround themselves and then to begin to identify with pagan culture. In other words, the danger that Genesis teaches us, probably one of the most dangerous things we can do as believers in God, is to not live and act and love like believers should. That Christians have a propensity to look like the world and not look like God. So what Joseph is doing here is he's getting his family to Goshen so they can continue to live as Hebrews, so that they can continue to worship God. They could be God-worshiping, Jesus-loving believers in Egypt, but not take on Egyptian culture. So what does that look like then for us then as believers in the 21st century, as followers of Jesus Christ? Well, here's what it doesn't mean. It doesn't mean that Christians must live in their own communities, have their own separate restaurants, have separate schools, have separate friends, see separate movies, or have separate music. It doesn't mean that we necessarily isolate ourselves and cut ourselves off from the culture. But here's what it does look like, and here's what we do need. We need believers in Jesus Christ. We need Christians who are firm in their faith, who live in the world but not like the world, and who do not compromise what they believe for the world. We need Christians who can live in the world but live like Christ. In fact, this is where so many Christians get it wrong. Christians, we need to be in the world, living as lights and signs to point people who do not know Jesus to come to know him. So we must live out our faith before unbelievers to show them the goodness and truthfulness of the gospel. But we have to be careful because we are not free from the danger of being persuaded to look like the world rather than like Christ. Does that make sense? Okay. So we must protect our faith. Protect the faith. And finally, not only does Jacob and the family of faith possess the faith and pass the faith and protect the faith, finally they present the faith. Look at verse 7. And Joseph brought in Jacob, his father, and stood him before Pharaoh. So we have the old man and we have Pharaoh. And Jacob, what did Jacob do? Verse 7. Jacob blessed Pharaoh. This is important, and it's going to happen twice. Jacob is going to bless Pharaoh twice, but let's go on. And Pharaoh said to Jacob, "How many are the days of the years of your life?" What does he ask him? How old are you? All right, that's a dangerous question, right? It really depends on who you ask. All right, 2 guys, I think it's okay. All right, they're probably safe. But he says, "Man, you're old." He's surprised by this. In Egyptian culture, the longer you live, kind of the more divine you are, the more powerful you are. And so he wants to know how old he is. And Jacob answers him. Jacob said to Pharaoh, now listen to this, it's kind of unique. He says, "The days of the years of my sojourning are 130. All right, how does he describe his life? He says, as a sojourning. Hey, listen, man, my life, it's a journey. Since I was born, I've been going somewhere. God has been taking me somewhere. I've been making pit stops. This stop in Egypt, this is just a pit stop along the way till I get to glory. I've been sojourning for 130 years. And then he says this, few and evil have been the days of the years of my life, and they have not attained to the days of the years of the life of my fathers and the days of their sojourning. Here's basically what Jacob says. Here's how he answers Pharaoh. He says, listen, I've been alive for 130 years, and life's been rough. I've been through a lot in my life. See, I took the blessing and birthright from my brother, and because of that, he wanted to kill me. So I ran away from home. And for 20 years, if he was ever going to catch up to me and maybe try to kill me. Along the way, I met a woman, and I loved her, but she had a sister and an evil dad, and my father-in-law, he tricked me. He took advantage of me. And after a long series of crazy, painful, difficult things, I finally was able to marry my wife and 3 other women. I had a lot of kids, and my kids, they fought. In fact, it got so bad that I thought my son was dead. And like I said, life's been rough, but you know what, Pharaoh? Even though life's been rough, I have something you don't have. You see, Pharaoh, I have God in my life. And even if I have nothing else, even if life is difficult and rough for the rest of my life, I don't know how long I'll live. All right, Jacob will actually live for another 17 more years. And no matter how rough this life is, it's going to be okay because I have God in my life. And because I have God in my life, Pharaoh, you know what? Can I bless you? Can I pray for you? Is there something I could do for you? Is there some way that I can encourage you? Because, man, you seem to have it all. I mean, you got all the wealth, you have all the power, you have all the control, you have all the respect, you have all the women, you have all whatever you want, but you don't have God. And so the one thing that you don't have is actually the only thing that you really need. Now, I know it doesn't say that, but it says that he blessed him, and that's what that means. He wanted to be a blessing to Pharaoh. It's interesting because Pharaoh probably thought Jacob was coming in to ask him for something, right? You're the most powerful man in Egypt. You have an old dude that moved. Pharaoh was probably expecting Jacob to ask him, and instead of asking for something, Jacob offered him something. You see, Jacob wasn't interested in getting, he was interested in giving. He's not intimidated by Pharaoh or his power or his wealth or his possessions or his position. He didn't ask for anything. He just wanted to be a blessing to Pharaoh. He wanted to pray for him. Let me ask you this. When was the last time? Can you think of the last time that somebody was a blessing to you? I pray you didn't have to think very hard. And maybe it was even this morning. Like I said, you guys singing this morning collectively, that was such a blessing to me. That was so encouraging to me. When's the last time somebody blessed you? When's the last time somebody said, you know what, hey, I noticed things look like they're going kind of rough for you. Can I pray for you? Hey, I know I normally ask you for help, or I know I normally ask you for something, but is there something I could do for you? Is there any way that I could be a blessing to you? Have you had somebody do that for you before? Hey, I noticed your work changed, and you're on a shift schedule now, and you're working midnights now, and I can only imagine that's kind of rough and hard to adjust. Is there anything I can do to free you up? Hey, I noticed you've been working really hard, and work isn't really going the way that you thought it was going. Could I do anything? Is there any way I could buy you a meal? Can I take you out for lunch? Hey, I notice your hair is like twice as gray because you now have 2 kids. And when the spotlights are on you, it's kind of shiny on the sides. Can I buy you some hair dye? No, I'm just kidding. When's the last time somebody blessed you? When's the last time somebody said, hey, can I pray for you? Do you got it? How did that make you feel? Were you encouraged? Maybe you felt like giving up, and now you're like, you have this renewed passion in your life. I mean, can we be honest? One of the most encouraging things someone could say to you is, hey, I'm praying for you. Now let me flip the script. When's the last time you were a blessing to somebody else? Because we know how good it feels to be blessed by other people. When is the last time you said, hey, life's going rough for me, but listen, I want to pray for you. Things are really hard on me, but I want to be a blessing to you. I don't want to get from you. I want to give to you. I want to encourage you. I want to present. Life's been rough, but Jesus has loved me. And so I could love you. I could bless you because he's blessed me. See, Jacob didn't just possess the faith. He didn't just pass it on to his children. We get that, right? We want our kids to believe in Christ. But what about other people? Do we want other people to know Jesus? Pharaoh did. In verse 10, Jacob blessed Pharaoh and went off from the presence of Pharaoh. And then Joseph settled his father and his brothers and gave them a possession in the land of Egypt, the best of the land, in the land of Ramesses. That's another word for Goshen, another name for Goshen, as Pharaoh had commanded it. And Joseph provided his father and his brothers and all his father's household with food, according to the number of their dependents. All right, so everything's good. There's a time of peace, but this family has done some really important things to not lose their faith in the midst of the time of peace. And what about you? Well, maybe some of you would say this morning, you know what, my life is anything but peaceful right now. In fact, I identify more with the sermons on suffering than I do the ones on peace. Well, you need to know that God does not always leave his people in the chaos. That God does bring peace to his people. Even if your circumstances might not be peaceful, even if your world might not be peaceful, God can bring you a peace that surpasses all kinds of understanding to the world. But maybe you're in that time right now. You'd say, hey, you know what? Things are going good. And to be honest, I haven't really even given a thought to God. Well, I think we have some things we need to take from this. Let me give you three. Three things that I think we could take from Genesis 46 and 47 really quickly. The first is simply this. Faith will always, always, always overcome fear. Faith will always overcome fear. See, in Genesis, over and over, we've seen God's people, they get fearful, and what do they try to do? They try to take control. All right, this just happened to me this weekend, and I'm going to have a moment of confession with you, if that's okay. You don't really have a choice, because I'm going to tell you. And it's free therapy for me. So this past weekend, I normally drive in my family. It's just out of habit. I normally drive. But this last weekend, for some reason, Faith ended up driving more. And we were headed home, and she was about to make a turn, and there was somebody walking, and for some reason I thought she didn't see her, and it made me nervous. And you know what I did? I grabbed the wheel. Which, a couple things. All right. First off, if you value your life, don't grab the wheel. If you're the passenger. If you value your marriage, do not grab the wheel if your wife is driving. But I grabbed the wheel. Well, here's the thing. She saw the guy. She saw the guy, but my fear, all right, I'm sitting in the passenger seat. I don't have a steering wheel. I don't have any type of control. My fear caused me to want to reach over and try to take control because I thought I knew better. And right away, God's like, you do that to me too all the time. And I said, I'm sorry, Lord. I said, I'm sorry, Faith. I'm sorry, Lord. This is me failing because when we get fearful, we try to take control. So you know what, God, it doesn't seem like you know what you're doing, and so I got this. And you know what we do? We wreck it. We wreck it. You see, Jacob let his fear drive him to worship God. And I think in that picture, we see how big God is. That maybe the reason that you're so afraid in your life is not because you have a reason to be afraid, but because your view of God is very small. The other thing is this. So not only will fear overcome faith, but faith always leads to obedience. You know, Jacob's 130 years old when he listens to God and leaves for Egypt. I think we'd all agree that that's way past retirement, and it's not a time where people tend to